It's time to fill out our form. Well, let's back up and fill out our form. So in the hazards column, we've got all of our hazards listed, the biological hazards, and we had a couple of physical hazards. In the CCP column, we already selected which were and which were not critical control points. Now let's do the critical limits. So we're at receiving. We decided that that was not a critical control point for the physical hazards, so we don't worry about that. For the biological hazards, you note I've split critical limits into two parts, so you can redo this form for your own purposes. I was stuck with what was in the book when we first did it. If I had to do over again, I would do it this way. So I split critical limits into FZ for frozen and RF for refrigerated. So for the biological hazards at receiving, that is a critical control point. For all those products, what would be the refrigerated temperature? At receiving, write that down. Whatever you think the refrigerator temperature, what's the receiving temperature supposed to be for the refrigerated products? That would be the celery, the chicken, celery, the chicken, the turkey, and the eggs. What would be the critical limit for the frozen ground beef? Write that in there. In the next column, how would we monitor those? How do we know that we hit those temperatures? Write that in there. I'll give you the answers in a bit. Next slideshow. What's going to be the corrective action if you did not receive the product at those temperatures? So you monitored, and what if it wasn't the proper temperature? What's your corrective action going to be? And then the last column we'll do right now is verification. How are we going to verify? How's the HACCP team going to verify that they did that? That if the product was not at proper temperature, that they took that corrective action. So right in there, how it is that the HACCP team will verify that. Then go down to the prepare step. For physical hazards, what's going to be the critical limit for physical hazards? How many physical hazards would we like to have? So write that in, what you think the limit should be for physical hazards. How much dirt should we allow? Then how are we going to monitor that? How are we going to know if there's too much dirt? How are we going to know if there's bones in the ground beef? What's going to be our corrective action in case we do find bones or in case we do find dirt? And how are we going to verify? How's the HACCP team going to verify that there was or there wasn't, well, should be that there wasn't any physical hazards in there? How are they going to verify that? For the biological hazards, in preparation, how are we going to monitor for biological hazards? What's going to be our standard to monitor that we hit the critical limits? So what are the critical limits? Such as hand washing, they wash their hands, such as cleaning and sanitizing the cutting board. So that would go under critical limits. And then how are we going to monitor that? What's going to be the corrective action if they didn't wash their hands, clean and sanitize the cutting board, left the product out too long, whatever you set up as the critical limits? Just do some. You're doing all this. We're going to go over my version of what this would look like, but I'd like you to give it a shot on your side. And then how's the HACCP team going to verify that they took care of those biological hazards by hitting those critical limits? And then we go down to the reheat. That's not a critical control point for the physical hazards. For the biological hazards, what's going to be the critical limit? So now that's in the oven, reheat. What's going to be the critical limit to make sure that we don't have too much biological hazards? How are we going to monitor that? What's going to be the corrective action if we didn't hit the critical limit? and how is the HACCP team going to verify that. So fill out the form to the best of your ability, and in the next lecture we'll go back and do the records column, and we'll see what mine looks like and compare it to yours. If you're lost, send me an email, ed@ehmanly.com.